Let me bring you into a moment that's been on everyone's lips for weeks, not just those who watch Sister Wives, but those who may have only ever heard of the Brown family in passing. It's the sort of moment that draws you in if you've been watching since season 1, or if you only know the name Kody Brown because of the news. Picture this: there are no bright studio lights, no carefully chosen outfits, no TLC cameras capturing multiple angles. The voices you're about to hear aren't edited for television. They're not part of a confessional interview. They're captured in a setting far more serious and far less forgiving than reality TV. This is a courtroom, and it's here, in these walls, that one of the most telling moments in the public life of the Brown family occurred. It didn't occur on a reunion special. It didn't happen during a tell-all episode. This occurred under oath. Now, it didn't start in drama. Really, it began so quietly that the majority of people got it wrong at first. A routine filing in a courthouse, the sort of thing that occurs daily, unbroken by cameras, unmarked by fanfare. Just paper and ink, hidden in public records. But this is the thing about public records. They're public, and in this instance, someone discovered them. Someone read them. And that's when the whispering began. When I originally obtained the transcript, I'm being truthful with you, I was expecting the normal: dates, names, legal terminology, possibly a reference to property, possibly some talk of logistics. But as I began to read it in line by line, I realized this was not about paperwork at all. This was about the heart of the Brown family. Because in between the official questions and answers, there was something else. There were evidences of tension, evidences of unwritten history, and moments when you could sense, even with typed words on paper, that feelings were running high. The words presented a different image of Kody Brown. This was not the Kody we know on camera, discussing family values or the difficulties of a plural marriage and smiling through the tension. This was a pressured Kody, a Kody who recognized that every word he uttered had substance, not only in front of a judge, but in the court of public opinion. And this is where it gets fascinating. When you read the transcript, there are moments where you can practically hear him pause, breathe, select his next sentence, as if tiptoeing across a frozen lake. One misstep, and all the water below could crack open. The questions started simply enough. They asked about dates, about agreements, about property decisions, but the further the questioning went, the more it edged toward the personal. And that's when the answers started revealing cracks in the polished image we've seen for years. You see, the Browns have always had a way of presenting a united front on camera, even when disagreements bubbled just under the surface. But here, without the comfort of editing or the safety of a family meeting, we're seeing something raw. The court was curious to know how some decisions were reached, who was consulted, if everyone was in agreement at the time. And although Kody didn't confess to wrongdoings directly, he did something equally revealing. He admitted that not everyone was pleased with the way things turned out. That may not be a lot at first glance, but for a family that had made their reputation on teamwork, harmony, and shared vision, that lone line was like a crack in the window. For one fleeting moment, you could look through and catch the reality, the human element of the Browns that doesn't always translate to a tidy little TV show an hour long. And this wasn't merely about a piece of ground or a sheet of paper. This was about trust, loyalty, the kind of vows you exchange when the cameras are off. The kind of vows that, if they're broken, don't just dissipate, they resound. As I continued reading, I couldn't help but envision the scene in that courtroom. Kody sitting there, suit jacket just a bit too crisp, a pile of papers within reach, the soft rustle of pages as the next question approaches, and the eyes, all eyes fixed on him. Not the warm smile of a TV crew he's worked with for years, but the level, intent eyes of people whose business is to get the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. And while Kody is always a man who can talk his way out of a difficult conversation, there's something unique about speaking under oath. Every word counts, every pause is observed, every detail is transcribed. I realized that it wasn't about the facts being presented. It was about the tone, the wording, the pauses of hesitation that the transcript silently observes. Pause. Long pause repeats question. Those little pieces of paper reveal a larger story. They reveal to us when Kody didn't have time to think. They reveal to us when he was considering his options, how to be honest without opening a larger door than he was willing to. And for a man accustomed to dictating his own story, that's an uncomfortable place to be. The more I read, the more I understood this transcript was just so much more than a legal document. It was a snapshot, a moment in time, of a family in transition, a family that has survived years of change, tear, and waning loyalty, now confronted with questions that strike right at the very heart of what's true and what's been made to appear so. And although the responses within those pages may not headline themselves, the sentiment within them will. Because to fans who have been with the Browns since they were a fledgling squad in Lehi, Utah, through their migrations across state borders, to their most recent on-again, off-again public romps, these transcripts validate what many of us suspected. There's an entirely different depth to this story yet to be fully revealed. By the final page, I had questions on my mind more than answers. Questions regarding how this will define the family's new chapter. Questions regarding how much is still concealed in those court documents. And questions regarding how Kody, a man so accustomed to dictating his own narrative, will cope with having someone else's account of it out there for all to see. One thing is certain, this isn't the type of moment that blows quietly away. This is the type of moment that lingers. The type that people discuss over coffee, in Facebook forums and around kitchen tables nationwide. Because whether you adore Kody Brown, detest his choices, or just are captivated by the family's experience, there is no denying it. Getting a gander at the intimate words of such a public person exposed like this is something you don't easily forget. And as we move into the remainder of this tale, one thing is definite. The court transcript just might be the tip of the iceberg of what is about to come to light. The court transcript begins in the way anyone would expect, plain, formal, and almost cold. It opens with the official header, the case number, the names of the parties, the date and the location. The clerk calls the matter. The judge enters, and everyone settles in. At first, there's nothing here that would make your heart race. It's the standard beginning to any hearing. But soon the questioning graduates beyond the protocols and into the intimate. And for a family such as the Browns, whose intimate lives have been put into millions of living rooms, there's something particularly jarring about viewing it all boiled down to stark black and white print on a page. The transition occurs when the conversation lands on the Coyote Pass property. Now, for those who may be new to this chapter of the tale, Coyote Pass is not some arbitrary piece of property. It's been a long-time dream and frustration point for the Brown clan. Kody bought this land in Arizona many years ago, with the idea that every wife would have her own home constructed there, all in walking distance of each other. It was meant to be a symbol of unity, and a fresh start for the whole family after their move from Las Vegas. On camera, we've seen Kody talk about Coyote Pass like it's the future, a place where his family could truly be together again. But here in the transcript, as the lawyer begins to dig into how decisions were actually made about the land, the mood changes. The questions are easy enough on the surface. Who made the decisions about how the land was to be divided? Were the pieces equal? Did both spouses have input? Kody's answer is one of tone, one that sounds cautious. He speaks of promises that were never written down, discussions that occurred over kitchen tables or during informal family gatherings. He describes it as not being like a business arrangement with contracts and signing parties. It was a family agreement, one based on trust. But that term, trust, weighs differently here, since the rest of the testimony indicates that the trust wasn't as sure as we might have believed. The attorney continues to prod. Did all parties agree on the distribution at the time? Now we come to where the transcript is more than words on paper. The court reporter observes a pause of some length. You can almost hear the silence in that room, how the air would be thicker, how the individuals sitting behind Kody might have shifted forward in their chairs. And then Kody utters an answer that is brief, but intense in what it says. Not everybody was pleased, he states. There were some who were against it openly. That's all, one sentence. But it makes a splat. For all these years, audiences have watched sister wives and seen the Browns sitting together in family council, sometimes at odds with each other, but usually smiling through tension. On TV, arguments get softened by laughter, or they get resolved neatly by the end of an episode. But here in a courtroom, there is no editing. There is no music cue to diffuse tension. There is no cut to a confessional where someone can explain how they've chosen to let it go. This is honest truth. When it came to one of the biggest choices in their joint life, how the land that was intended to represent unity would be split up, not everyone saw eye to eye. and not merely quietly. Kody confesses some members of the family were outspokenly against it. That word choice is significant. Openly implies these weren't polite reservations or diplomatic dissents. It implies there were frank, maybe even heated discussion. That in the minutes leading up to this distribution, emotions were voiced loud enough, strong enough, that no one would misread them. As I envision this, I see the wives sitting at a table, all with their own idea of what life at Coyote Pass ought to be. Perhaps Christine, who already was feeling disconnected in her marriage, desired autonomy. Perhaps Janelle, who always prized pragmatism, desired to have the land apportioned in a manner that served her purposes. Perhaps Meri, whose marriage to Kody was tense for so many years, felt her opinion wasn't really heard. And Robyn, Kody's frequent perceived dutiful sidekick, may have had opinions of her own as well. But the transcript doesn't provide all those specifics. It merely renders Kody's admission that this was not a harmonious decision. The attorney, feeling that there's more to this, inquires about how those differences were resolved. Did the family go back on the decision? Did they discuss other plans? Kody explains that the division was still talked about in subsequent months, yet there's no doubt that the initial division left scars. Here's where the emotional undertone enters. When families disagree over money or possession, it's not about the money or possessions in most cases. Those disagreements usually reveal beneath them greater feeling about who matters, who has authority, who is being heard, and who isn't. The hesitation before Kody's response indicates to me that he knew full well how charged that question was. It was not just a matter of legality. It was one of unity, of the vows they'd exchanged with one another, and whether or not those vows had been upheld. What I also observe is that in his testimony, Kody does not attempt to feign the idea that everyone concurred. That speaks volumes. In a way, it's almost a relief to see him shed the TV gloss and confess, if only for a moment, that reality was more complicated. But it does leave one wondering, if these conflicts were open, why did we not get to witness more of them on the show? Was it editing? A family choice to keep some disagreements off the air? And here's something else that struck me. The transcript establishes that there was no signed written agreement over the land. Everything was understood verbally. For most families, that would be good enough when everyone's getting along. But in a family where 3 of the 4 marriages have since dissolved, those loose arrangements can become a hotbed of serious conflict. In this moment, I imagine the courtroom as almost 2 worlds colliding. On one side, you have the sister wives narrative, a family working together toward a shared dream. On the other, you have the legal reality that without clear agreements, dreams can turn into disputes. And this, I believe, is where fans who have watched the Browns for years are ambivalent. There is sympathy for the difficulty of shepherding such a big mixed-up family. There is anger that something as significant as going to Coyote Pass wasn't nailed down in a manner that prevented later conflict. And there is intrigue, because if this much is coming out in just one section of a court transcript, how much more might those pages reveal? By the end of this portion of the testimony, the atmosphere in the transcript becomes denser. You can tell the lawyer has hit on something significant, and Kody's response, brief as it is, lingered. Not everybody was happy. Some were openly against it. In television, we're used to seeing storylines wrap up neatly. In court, there are no neat endings, just facts, admissions, and whatever consequences come next. And for the Browns, this was one of those moments where the carefully managed image of unity gave way to a simple, unpolished truth. When it came to their future home, their shared dream, they were not all on the same page. And that truth will count, not only for the resolution of this case, but for how the family proceeds after this. Let's be real, discussing land and property is one thing, but when the discussion turns to hearts, that's when things get personal. And within this courtroom transcript, the attention begins to shift. What started as a discussion about tracks, fences, and contractual agreements begins to veer in the direction of something much more sensitive, something intimate. The lawyers, perhaps feeling the tension themselves, slowly steer the questions in another direction. They want to know about communication. They want to know about family cohesion. They want to know about what's transpired behind the scenes since some wives decided to recuse. And then, it's there, the pivot. The property disputes fade into the background, and we're now hearing about relations, about the fragile bonds between husband and wife, about the distance that has grown over the years, and about what happens when promises made in the glow of love start to feel heavy. Kody's voice in these moments is different. It's not sharp, it's not defensive, it's slow, measured, as if each word is carefully considered before it crosses his lips. The court transcript renders phrases such as different visions for the future and respecting individual choice. In black and white, they read peaceful, nearly diplomatic. But if you have followed this family, if you've seen sister wives for longer than a season or you understand that words have much greater significance. Because different visions for the future is more than about choices in lifestyle or where you want to reside. It's about goals that no longer fit. It's about waking up one morning and seeing the life you believed you were creating together has subtly become divergent paths. And then there's the moment, the line that freezes you in your tracks. It's brief, nearly tactful, but it sounds like something you can only say when you've experienced. I can't make someone stay if they've decided to walk away. 8 small words. But within those words, there's resignation, there's acceptance, and perhaps a hint of regret. Consider that for a moment. We've seen Kody Brown on TV as the confident leader of a large, complex family. We've seen him smiling at gatherings, holding hands during family trips, talking about building homes together on Coyote Pass. But here, in a sworn statement, the man who once envisioned a shared forever is admitting, publicly in front of a judge, that sometimes love is not enough. For fans who followed the Browns for over a decade, this moment is almost surreal. We've seen the family through births, weddings, and holiday celebrations. We've watched them move states, start businesses, and build new traditions. But now, stripped of TV's warm lighting and careful editing, we're hearing the truth in its rawest. Even a family built on shared faith, commitment, and years of history can't always stay together. The transcript goes on, and you can almost sense the courtroom falling silent. No one cuts him off. No one pressured. Everyone in that room seems to know the gravity of what they're living. He talks about the breakups, the way communication was different, the way some conversations just stopped occurring. He speaks of the distant, physical distance, yes, but emotion, the kind that insidiously develops. So slowly you don't even realize it until one day you see that you're not living the same life. The lawyer inquires about reconciliation effort. Did they attempt therapy, mediation, heart-to-heart conversations? Kody concedes there were attempts. There were lengthy discussions, some well into the evening hours. There were times it seemed as though perhaps, maybe they could span the distance. But then other days when the silence was louder than any words ever could. He makes one more observation that jumps out. You can't force closeness. You can invite it, but you can't demand it. That line may not be a headline, but it's the sort of truth that will ring with anyone who has lived through a broken, particularly audience members in their 50s, 60s, 70s. Viewers who understand that love isn't about grand gestures. It's about the mundane day-to-day decision to be there for each other. And perhaps that's the biggest indicator of this entire conversation. Before a judge, with every sentence captured on the record, Kody isn't finger-pointing. He's not throwing names around or blaming individual incidents. He's recounting the gradual disintegration of bonds, how circumstances and time can find individuals who stood shoulder to shoulder and align them on opposing sides of the room, sometimes without both even quite realizing it had occurred. But that's where it gets even more powerful. The attorney raises the timeline of these developments. When did things begin to change? Was it during the Flagstaff relocation, during the battles over Coyote Pass, or before that, maybe the Las Vegas years? Kody pauses. The transcript actually records the hesitation. And then he makes a vague but charged statement. Some things have been years in the making. Some were abrupt. You don't always know to expect them until they're already here. And that right there is the heartache. Because although we, the audience, might have caught glimpses, the quiet times, the strained glances, the interrupted conversations on screen, this is proof that off-screen, those cracks were genuine and developing long before they were ever referenced in public. By the time this segment of the testimony concludes, you feel like Kody isn't so much defending himself in a court of law. He's admitting, in very public fashion, that his family will never be whole again. And although disputes over property and court orders can be settled, the emotional distance that has developed among some family members that can't be fixed by any judge. As the judge requests a brief recess, I picture the room taking a deep breath. Kody settles back in his seat. Lawyers rearrange their papers, and somewhere within that stillness, the heaviness of what has just been uttered hangs suspended in the room. When the court resumes, the emphasis will again be shifted, back to technical jargon and financial specifics. But for the reader of that transcript, Section 3 is what you remember. That's when the legal argument gives way to the human narrative. Because in the end, This is not about land or agreements. It's about human beings who shared a life once and now must find ways to live out individual futures. And about the reality that even the strongest seeming families have cracks, and sometimes those cracks become too large to mend. When I read this section of court transcript, I couldn't help but think that the strongest moments weren't in the answers themselves, but between them. The record is tidy, proper, and factual, but the pauses are there. The hesitations, the repeated "can you clarify" requests, the spots where Kody's answers got shorter, almost clipped. Those little things tell a lot. You have to keep in mind, a court transcript doesn't record tone of voice, the chair shifting, or the flash of emotion in an eye. It simply relays what was said. But if you've been keeping up with Kody Brown for years, you can fill in those gaps. You can picture how his jaw could have clenched, how his shoulders could have squared, how he could have sucked in that deep breath to answer a question he did not wish to answer. And in this segment of the hearing, the subject turned to something no family wishes to have it all unraveled in a public setting. The attorney's tone, at least as seen in the transcript, is steady, concise, and systematic. They begin innocently. "Mr. Brown, would you tell me how money decisions were made in your home?" Kody responds with a stereotypical refrain. He tells that decisions were always made in the family's best interests, that everybody had input, and that things were discussed openly. It is the type of response you would anticipate. Respectful, unconfrontational, practically rehearsed. But the lawyer does not leave it there. Were there instances where some spouses had greater control over financial decisions than others? There's a pause, the kind that feels longer on paper than it probably was in person, and then Kody repeats himself. Decisions were made in the family's best interest. It's the exact same phrase as before, word for word. That repetition, it's telling. Sometimes when a witness repeats the exact same answer, it means they want to close the door on that subject without saying more. It's a nuanced version of, "That's all I'm going to say on this," without actually saying no. And if you've seen enough courtroom sparring, you're aware that sometimes that can be an indicator of underlying tension simmering just below the surface. The lawyer prods once more. Were there ever disagreements regarding how money was spent? For instance, disagreements on property upgrades, joint expenditures, or business ventures? Kody responds slowly this time. The transcript records pause, and then his response: "In a family our size there will always be disagreements, but we worked through them as best we could." Now, I want you to imagine this, because for longtime Sister Wives fans, these words don't stand alone. They're piled upon years of history. You recall the times the Browns discussed constructing on Coyote Pass. You remember when there were discussions of relocating houses in Las Vegas. You've witnessed the stress over the concept of constructing several homes versus one giant shared residence. It is all that history suspended in the air behind a line such as, "We worked through them as best we could." Then there is one of the most sensitive questions of the day. Were all spouses equally privy to financial books? It's an easy question, the sort you could answer yes or no. But Kody doesn't respond simply. Instead, he tells us that access hinged on the situation, that some spouses were more engaged in some part of the finances, and that trust was a huge factor. Now, for someone in the audience, that might sound fine, reasonable even. In any large family, people have different roles, but in a courtroom, that's an opening. Because if access depended on circumstances, and if trust was selective, that means not everyone was looking at the same financial picture at the same time. And that, well, it can be a recipe for suspicion. The transcript doesn't record reactions, but you can probably envision how that response came across to anyone in the room who felt left out of some conversation. And that is the unspoken dimension here. This wasn't about bank accounts or property lines, it was about trust. When trust in joint finances is broken, everything else begins to feel unstable too. It's not about numbers on a spreadsheet anymore. It's about whether the person sitting across from you is being totally honest with you. From there, questioning shifts again, not so much about money, but about decision-making in general. Would you say all spouses had an equal say in major family decisions? Kody answers thoughtfully. We wanted to make decisions together, but in practice sometimes some voices carried more weight based on the circumstances. That's just one of those responses that tells more than it sounds like it tells. Some voices were more influential. Might mean anything from somebody having more experience, to somebody being more convincing, to somebody having more sway over Kody on a personal level. For viewers who've seen the dynamics between Kody and each of his wives over the years, you know that this is not a new undertone. But to hear it said, in a courtroom, under oath, is different. What's remarkable about this is the tension isn't from voices being raised or from arguing. It's from what isn't being said outright. The transcript is subdued. The language is professional. But between the lines, you sense the pull of years of history together, times when decisions were taken in the heat of the moment, when individuals walked out of a conversation feeling they had not been heard, or when something that was agreed upon in the kitchen did not make it through the bank. And perhaps that's why this part of the transcript is so dense, because money is not generally about money. It's about safety, autonomy, respect, and the sense that everybody's on an even playing field. The more I read, the more I could picture viewers at home leaning forward in their seat. This wasn't the joking around of a TLC confession interview. This was the same family you've been following for over a decade, speaking under oath, with every word recorded, knowing that those words could have real consequences. And that's the thing. In reality TV, disagreements can be edited, softened, or even left out entirely. But in a courtroom, once the words are spoken, they're preserved exactly as they came out. No editing, no music to lighten the mood, no cutaway shots to break tension, just the raw exchange, question by question. By the end of this section of the transcript, one truth is evident. This wasn't about producing a single right answer. It wasn't about being proved right and someone else being wrong. It was about unspooling years of jointly made decisions, jointly held responsibilities, and jointly shared dreams, and observing where the threads had begun to unravel. And perhaps that's why, without angry voices or histrionic outbursts, this part of the testimony feels so candid. Because when finances and trust are intertwined, the unraveling is not easy. And here in this unemotional measured back and forth, you get to see the unraveling unfold in real time. By the time you turn in at the final page of this court transcript, you know something. It's not just about one day in court. It's not about legal pleadings, property splits, or land surveys. It's about bringing an entire history into clear view. It's about how the picture we've watched on television for over a decade, the Sunday night family dinners, the group vacation, the optimistic conversations about building forever homes on Coyote Pass, all come together with the harder, quieter moments that never made it to air. And for Kody Brown, it's the balancing act you can feel in every response he provided that day. On one hand, there's the Kody we've all seen for years, the confident patriarch, the man with a vision for his family's future, the face of sister wives. On the other hand, there's the man in that courtroom, carefully weighing each word, knowing that every sentence could be dissected not just by lawyers but by fans, critics, and maybe even family members themselves. If you've watched Sister Wives since the beginning, you know how carefully Kody's tried to maintain the family's reputation. He's the one who's been discussing unity, togetherness, and creating something that would last even past himself. But in a courtroom, questions aren't about ideals, they're about reality. Who signed what? Who possessed what? Who agreed? And who did not? In those instances, the fellow who based a life on common commitments is then forced to demonstrate, on paper, what was actually common. And that's not a simple matter to accomplish, particularly when the relationships have changed, and some of the individuals involved no longer communicate in the same manner as before. It's like seeing two photos, one from the early days of Sister Wives, everyone smiling and wearing matching t-shirts, and one today, with more serious-looking faces. Both photos are accurate, but they reveal different aspects of the truth. Courtrooms are good at stripping the situation back to basics. The emotions may be in full flow, but on the transcript it all comes out in black and white. You can't listen to the cracking of the voice, you can't witness the looking away, but you can observe the silence, and occasionally those silences ring louder than any response. Kody's transcript reveals a man not only arguing himself into the clear legally, but also dealing with the emotional aftershocks of his words. Because each yes or no isn't merely a legal concession, it's a piece of the family's hidden history, being put into public record. For longtime viewers, this is where the story hits deeper. Because we've seen the moments when the Browns pulled together against outside pressure. We've heard them talk about us against the world. But in this courtroom, the questions aren't coming from outsiders. They're about the disagreements inside the family itself. One of the hardest parts about reading these transcripts is realizing just how much has changed. We recall the times when Kody would call all the wives into the living room, spreading grand plans for the future. We recall shared laughter around the holidays, teasing among the children, and the image of all four wives coexisting peacefully. But here on these pages of law, we witness another reality. We witness a family that has fractured, not so much in anger each time, but in purpose. Folks desire different things now. The one house vision yielded to split houses. Joint funds developed into single accounts. Collective decisions became personal ones. And Kody's words, even the prudent ones, speak to that change. When he says, "I can't make someone stay if they've decided to walk away," you can sense the acceptance in it. It isn't the battle cry of a man who is determined to keep everyone together no matter what. It's the voice of someone who has come to understand that sometimes, releasing is part of loving people, even when it is painful. For those of us who followed the Browns for years, this transcript isn't just legal documentation. It's a bridge between what we've seen and what we've suspected. We've all watched enough reality TV to know that not every moment is shown, and not every conversation makes it into an episode. But reading these court records is like peeking behind the curtain. It confirms that the tensions we've seen on screen didn't end when the cameras stopped rolling. And perhaps that's why this tale is so resonant, particularly with viewers who are a few years older, who have experienced seasons of change in their own lives. We know that things change in relationships. We know that dreams we once fought for with our arms wrapped around them sometimes, not because someone gave up, but because life pulled everyone in different ways. When you shut that transcript, you're left with something more than a legal summary. You're left with the image of a man at the intersection of public image and private reality. You're left with the knowledge that even families who've lived their lives on TV still have pages that are painful, messy, and extraordinarily human. The disputes over property and the court battles will ultimately be settled. Papers will be signed, land will be divided up, and the courtroom will proceed to other cases. But the emotional toll, on Kody, on his wives, on the children, will endure long after any legal documentation. And for the viewers, that's what remains. The Brown saga has ever been more than polygamy, or reality television stardom, or real estate and Flagstaff. It's been about the human dream of constructing a family that can ride out any tempest. That transcript reminds us that even when the tempests become fiercer than anyone had envisioned, the attempt to cling, or to sever ties with dignity, remains. One thing is sure, this is not the end of the Browns' tale. Court cases may end, but family tales never really do. There will be additional conversation, more reunion, perhaps more argument. There will be times of healing, and likely times of frustration. That's just life. For the Browns, and for Kody especially, the challenge now is figuring out what family means in this new chapter. The transcripts we've read might mark the end of one era, but they're also the start of another. And for us sitting here on the outside, perhaps thinking about our own family history, there's something surprisingly reassuring in that. Because it reminds us that families everywhere, on TV or living down the street from us, are always works in progress. And that is why, all these years later, we continue to watch. Not for perfection, but because we see ourselves, our hopes, our struggles, our transformation in theirs.